Hey, hi, how are you? Employers, three things. Three things that you can do to help prevent worker injury and worker fatality. Stick around. I'll tell you those three things. But first, let's talk about the fact that I'm no longer a basement refugee in the new office. Yay! However, still experiencing some technical difficulties in the way everything's set up. And it's a mess of cables. Now, not unsafe, but the cable management leaves a lot to be desired. That's the absolute truth. But let's talk about three things that you, employers, can do to help reduce worker injury and hopefully even prevent worker fatality. I know you might be surprised, but let's talk about it. And so how I'm going to talk about it is I'm going to go over some recent things in the news. And so here's one here. Sask Power was fined $840,000 in relation to Weyburn worker deaths. Lineman Scott Bill and coal crooks fell from a bucket truck while tying power lines in Weyburn on October 8th, 2020. Now, Sask Power has been ordered to pay $840,000 after being found guilty of three charges to the deaths of two linemen who fell while tying in power lines. Now, just to be clear here, I just want to go forward and just say in defense of Sask Power, the moment that occurred, they were right there, Johnny on the spot, ready to write the check. They had no ifs, ands, or buts. It wasn't even appealed. It was just bang, right off the bat. Now, one thing that goes further is, and I want to reiterate, no amount of money, no court ruling, nothing, no penalty is going to bring these folks home. But let's look a little bit further into this here, shall we? Now, Scott, Bill, and coal crooks were over 15 feet above the ground in a bucket truck when the bucket tipped. Now, what goes on further to say is in the findings that neither of the men had his fall arrest lanyard hooked up when the incident occurred. And when two people are in a bucket, it's very precarious. So consider that, like consider two people standing up in a canoe. Not quite as bad, but you get the gist and balancing and everything. Now, it goes on further to say a couple of things. And one of them here is the workers were being allowed to work at heights without being properly tied off through the use of fall protection equipment or fall arrest equipment. And there was a fourth charge about that they failed to train the men to operate the aerial equipment safely, however that was stayed. It's important to understand here a couple of things. Okay, first off, number one, they should have been tied off. Number two is that no matter what, you can never blame the worker if there weren't steps taken for two things. One, adequate supervision, and number two, performance management. If workers aren't following the process, then you have to performance manage them. That's it in a nutshell. Now, I have heard the argument time and time again, and that's, well, I want to be able to jump out if the vehicle, the unit, the lift starts to fall. Albeit, great. Heard that one many, many times. It's been my experience that in, well, a little over 30 years of doing this, that, you know what? Laws are in place for a reason, and usually it's for one thing, protection of the worker. So if you don't like it and you want to change the laws, then make the effort to do that, but you'll have to have something that's going to equally protect the worker. That's the important thing. Now, one other thing to consider here is, and it happens often, is that a lot of times workers are either inadequately trained or don't receive an orientation or there's no supervision. You're going to see a constant theme here, okay? Keep up. But let's go to the next one, shall we? Okay. Here we have WorkSafe BC fines Fort St. John business over $12,000 for a fatal workplace accident. Now, so one thing to remember is the fining structure, while similar from province to province here in Canada, there are some differences in the way it's applied. The other thing is that often, and usually the hope is that fines are applied in a way that they will be felt by the organization receiving them. They won't be just a slap on the wrist. But here, if we look, that there was an unfortunate turn of events, a fatal accident at Ideal Office Solutions in Fort St. John, BC. It triggered a fine of $12,000, which was imposed by WorkSafe BC. The worker was basically ended up there moving an office printer, and it fell on him during a move down a staircase. And now there was no safe work procedure in place, and especially when operating hand trucks, specifically a stair climber used in the move. The investigation also revealed that the fatally injured worker had not received appropriate safety orientation or training in the use of the stair climber. I told you might be seeing a common thread here. Once again, we have to understand that employees need and require three things. They need a good worker orientation. They need to be trained in how to safely perform the tasks that they've been hired to do, and they need to be supervised. That's just it in a nutshell. If you're not supervising your workers, then you know what? You kind of got a problem. So let's talk about another one here. Okay? And that's Embrun Dairy Queen was fined $40,000 for a workplace blizzard accident. Now, I know you're likely thinking to yourself, the fatality was $12,000, and when we read further, we see that this was a neck injury. However, once again, remember, the notion is the fine, and I'll talk more about this in just a second, the notion is that the fine should be felt by the company. It should have some impact, so it won't be considered just a slap on the wrist. But the teenager suffered a serious neck injury and was hospitalized for 2 weeks. So that's one. Another thing to consider is this. No matter what, they're young, and I've heard the saying before, I use it myself sometimes. If they're young, they'll bounce back. However, I've got injuries myself that I suffered as a teenager, and I'm almost 60, and they still bother me to this day. So let's keep that in mind and quality of life. But a Dairy Queen in Embrun, this is in Ontario, was fined $40,000 in connection with a workplace accident suffered by a 16-year-old employee whose hair was ensnarled by the spindle of the store's blizzard machine. Now, I know you're likely all saying, well, she should have had her hair done up. Granted, she likely should have. We'll talk a bit more about that in a second. Remember, I said before, three things: orientation, safety training, and supervision. Okay, so let's look at this a little bit further here. So, in a recent decision, the Court of Appeal for Ontario varied the original sentence in the case and imposed a fine of more than 5 times larger than the initial one issued by a Justice of the Peace under the Occupational Health and Safety Act. The court has recognized in order to achieve a specific and general deterrence, the amount of the fine imposed on a corporate defendant must be sufficient that the fine will be felt by the corporation, not merely a slap on their wrist. And that's becoming more and more the trend here, is that we're seeing that occupational health and safety jurisdictions, authorities, but also the courts are starting to understand that, you know what, these, how should we say, I'm looking for the term for it, but basically the token fine is not going to do it anymore. We need to make sure that that's going to happen. However, employers, there's some good news in this. Okay? Keep reading. You'll see what I'm talking about, or let's keep reading. So, the court heard in September of 2017 a high school student employed at the Embrun Dairy Queen was in the process of using the blizzard machine when she was confused by something on the restaurant's order board. She took her foot off of the pedal and turned as a coworker to ask a coworker a question, when her long hair caught in the spindle, which had not stopped rotating. She stepped towards the machine, but her foot accidentally tapped the pedal powering the machine again, wrenching more of her hair around the spindle, along with another employee. She then heard a loud cracking sound in her neck. So, like I said, remember, once again, yes, she had her hair down, and we'll talk more about that in just a second, I promise. But when these things occur, a lot of times you have the ability to step off the pedal and take the power off the machine. Just like, taking your foot off the gas on a vehicle. However, when she's getting sucked into it, you can just imagine her foot was in close proximity to the pedal. So let's look into it a bit more here. The young employee was stuck in the machine for 7 minutes until the shift leader managed to untangle the hair from the spindle. Now, this is the big deal. The machine used to blend ice cream came with a plastic safety guard, the court heard. But on the day of the accident, the protective guard had been removed by the shift leader in contravention of OSHA. Okay, it doesn't matter what jurisdiction you're in. circumventing a safeguard on a machine is in non-compliance. It is. It's in contravention of any health and safety legislation in Canada, in the US, pretty much in the world. But it also, one other thing, it just defies common sense. Let's keep reading. It was common practice, the court heard, for some employees to remove the guard in order to save time, which I've heard time and time again, and I'm pretty sure my safety professional colleagues out there have heard the same thing, particularly during the store's busiest periods. The 16-year-old had once asked why some employees used the plastic guard and some didn't, and she was told that it wasn't really required. Once again, let's go back to that original point I had about circumventing safeguards is not a good thing, and it's still against most legislation. But here's another one. The employee received no specific training on how to safely operate the machine or about occupational health and safety awareness in general. Now, Dairy Queen had an employee handbook that addressed the machine guard system and other health and safety issues. The employee did not receive a copy of it. So, once again, remember, 3 things: orientation, training, and supervision. So, what happened is, as a result, the Embrun Dairy Queen was charged under the Employees Health and Safety Act, failing to ensure, or the Province's Health and Safety Act, failing to ensure the employee's hair was suitably confined. So, once again, yes, the employee should have had her hair tied up. However, once again, why did the supervisor let them just continue to work and also they were charged with failing to ensure the machine's spindle was guarded. Once again, I can't say it enough: orientation, training, supervision. But we have to remember one thing when we're talking about supervision, is that it's becoming more and more the norm these days that supervisors, you have to understand, it's been for quite some time, that supervisors have a certain liability under the legislation as well and can end up with these fines as well.
Really? Really?
So let's read another one, and this is right here at home in Alberta. And a construction company and supervisor were fined over $500,000 for a 2019 airdrie fatality. Now, this came through earlier this summer. I meant to get to it, but as I said, I was busy. But it's important to understand, supervisors, you have a job to supervise. Yes, I know you want to get her done. You do. However, let's understand one thing, that it isn't about making KPIs. It isn't about achieving that performance bonus. It isn't about getting the job completed on time. What it is about is doing all 3 of those things, but having all the employees go home with the same amount of body parts that they arrived with. Okay? So it's important to understand that no job is worth rushing through that amount. Okay? So now, I wasn't there, wasn't involved in the investigation. However, let's read on and look at it a bit. Construction company and supervisor will pay fines totaling $546,000. I don't care who you are, that's a lot of cash. Unless you're like Elon Musk. Related to a workplace fatality that occurred in Airdrie in October of 2019, Volker Steven Contracting Limited and Mike O'Neill, the supervisor, were each convicted of 2 counts under occupational health and safety legislation in the Calgary Court of Justice, April 11th, 2024. They were sentenced on June 20th, 2024, and their trial took over multiple phases. But here's the thing. They stem from an accident where a worker was struck by a vehicle driven by the supervisor and suffered fatal injuries. The company, of course, was convicted. The company was fined a total of $480,000, which including the 20% victim fine surcharge. The supervisor themselves, they were convicted under the OHS Act for failing to ensure the health and safety of a worker under the OHS code, exposing a worker to danger from moving equipment. The supervisor was fined $66,000, including the 20% victim surcharge. So, once again, employers have to ensure an adequate orientation is done. They have to ensure that workers are trained to safely do the job. And supervisors, you got to supervise. Once again, those 3 things. And I think you've seen a common theme, but you know what? No matter what, I'm going to go over it again. Okay? employees need to have an adequate orientation. There was a saying a long time ago, can't remember who said it, who was it attributed to, but they said, give me a child for the first 6 years of his life, I'll teach him music, he will know nothing but music. So I want to go out on a limb. Here. What about we take a worker and for the first 7 hours of their first day, we teach them a good orientation. We teach them safety. We make sure that they know how to do their job safely. And then for the rest of that week, we make sure that we monitor them doing that job safely. We make sure that they're fully trained in every aspect and they're going to be able to do that job safely. And then finally, we're going to continue to supervise that worker for the life of his career with our company. And then we're going to empower them to not only be successful, but to go home safely every night. And if they aren't abiding by the health and safety measures that you've outlined as an employer and supervisor, then you know what? You performance manage them and if need be, out the door. Because that's your duty. Honestly. And so I have to ask this question. I always want to ask this question. Is what have you done today to make your workplace safer? Have you been a safety leader? Have you worked to make your workplace safer? So now, if you want to know more as a supervisor about how to how to supervise your workers and supervise them well and correct them well, have a look at this video up here. But if you want to know more about workplace orientations, have a look at this video up here. Okay? Until we see each other again, I really hope we do, and I hope I get my office cleaned up and the cables managed. Take care. Be a safety leader. Okay? Bye for now.